over the past year, food prices have been going through the roof, and Chipotle's prices in Q1 of this year are up 10% compared to Q1 of 2022. So my double steak burrito bowl now costs $20.24. And just hearing myself say that sounds insane. So, in today's video, we have 3 goals. First, can I make a steak burrito bowl that is cheaper, but additionally, can I make one that is lower calorie, but the same weight, and lastly, better tasting? And I'll show you some home cook techniques you can use to pre-prep some of the components, which make it perfect for a busy weeknight. So, let's break it down. First, we need to establish some metrics. So I bought and pulled apart a double steak burrito bowl and weighed out every component to see exactly what you get for $20.24. And here are the findings with a couple of graphs. So as you might guess, the rice makes most of the total weight of the bowl and then followed closely by the steak. Now, when it comes to calories, a couple of the big hitters are, again, the steak, but the guacamole and sour cream as well, and this is an area that we can tackle when it comes to making a lower calorie option. And I'll show updated versions of these charts with the homemade version in a bit, but lastly, let's talk grocery budget. I decided to give myself a grocery budget of $40.48, or the price of 2 of these Chipotle bowls. So that means I have to buy all of the components outside of some pantry staples like oil, salt, and some spices, and I was shocked how cheap all of this stuff ended up being. In total, I spent $32.05 at the grocery store for this long list of items, which included meat, cheese, produce, all in there. And my best cost-saving measure here was using a chuck roast that was on sale. Normally, this is something I would braise, but we'll see it's great for slicing thin and just cooking on the stovetop. Lastly, before we dive into the recipe, I think there are some key areas where we can really enhance the flavor of the burrito bowl.
After tasting through these, there's 4 key areas I want to focus on for our lower calorie bowl that I think we can improve upon. First up is the steak. So this is a pretty lean cut, which is good for calorie purposes, but it doesn't have too much texture, and in general, the flavor is nothing to be super excited about. And then secondly, I want to kind of make a guacamole sauce, I think with more cilantro, a little bit more spice, and probably cut it with some sour cream to kind of combine the two. For the rice, I want to make a very fragrant Mexican style rice. This is pretty solid, but I think we can do a little bit better. And then I actually love this corn salsa they make. The one improvement though, I think this really works if you char it on the grill first before mixing it up. So those are the 4 key areas. Let's go ahead and make these things, and then we'll do a final taste test comparing the two in their actual burrito bowl form at the end.
The issue with making burrito bowls from scratch at home is that there are kind of a lot of components to make. So for 2 of these, we are going to pre-prep them starting with the steak. So for the steak, we're going to be using my freezer meat prep technique, which I talked about in my last video. So take the chuck roast and start breaking it down into 3 or 4 more manageable portions, and then cut them into very thin strips. And the idea here is that we can then freeze these strips and use them straight from the freezer. After slicing the whole thing up, I added the beef to a sheet pan, and let's add some seasonings. I chose to add a big spoonful of cumin seeds and a big sprinkle of chili powder all over before mixing everything together. You could add salt at this point too if you are not freezing it, but I decided to add salt later for frozen proteins. Add the entire tray of beef to the freezer, and then 2 hours later, it should be frozen through. So transfer that beef to freezer bags and then toss them back into the freezer until you are ready. Now, before we cook the beef, I wanted to test what it's like to freeze cooked rice and then reheat it. So that's what I did with the Mexican rice. For the rice, you could use any mix of aromatics, but I love using tomatoes, serrano peppers, and garlic. So set a saucepan over medium heat and add in a 5-gram drizzle of oil. Toss in 12 grams of chicken bouillon, which is going to be our salt source and provide amazing flavor alongside that garlic and serrano, and let everything toast for 30 seconds before adding the tomatoes and cooking all of that down for 1 more minute. Lastly, toss in the rice and toast that as well. After 2 minutes, I want to see some little char marks on the exterior of the rice, which is going to help enhance and give us a little bit more depth of flavor. Finally, add 250 grams of water and bring that entire thing to a boil. Let this boil for 2 minutes, then turn the heat to low, add a towel and lid over the top, and let this simmer for 25 minutes. And now we have some beautifully fragrant rice that is ready to go. I added the cooked rice to a sheet pan, and then again, I just made some perforation lines in the pan and tossed the whole thing into the freezer. Once the rice was frozen, I just transferred it over to a freezer bag. And then when you're ready to cook, you now have labeled steak and rice you can just pull from the freezer and instantly turn into a meal. To cook the steak, remove a portion out from the bag and then just toss it onto the griddle and turn the heat to medium-high. Now, a couple of keys here. I don't add any extra oil as there should be enough fat from the beef itself to crisp up. And secondly, I do not touch it at all. I let it completely crisp on one side for 3 to 4 minutes. So while we wait, let me tell you about the company that made this griddle, Made in Cookware. Made In makes a whole array of high-quality performance cookware for home cooks, but this carbon steel griddle is easily my favorite and most used item. I use it every day, and it doesn't really leave the stovetop. The carbon steel griddle comes pre-seasoned and is perfect for fast and even cooking. It can handle up to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit and has hand-welded edges and handles, so you can easily use it on the stove, grill, or even over an open flame. It's large enough to cover 2 burners, and it's not a question of what should you cook on it, but really what can't you cook on it, because I've used it for just about everything. So, if you want to check out the carbon steel griddle or any of Made In's high-performance cookware, head to the link in my description to save on your order, and thank you again, Made In, for sponsoring this video. Back of the steak, it is now beautifully crisp on bottom, so I scrape it with a spatula and flip it over. And as you can see, we have some nice browning on the exterior that's not only going to provide extra texture, but also extra flavor. After flipping, let the steak cook for another minute, and then lastly, and very importantly, we need to add some salt because again, I haven't added any salt before the freezing process. Once the salt is added, mix that in, and then turn off the heat, and I like adding a spritz of lime juice as well, which gives it a nice acidic punch that pairs well with the beef. And then while that beef was cooking, I just tossed my freezer rice into the microwave, then set that into a bowl. So by pre-prepping these 2 core components, all you have to do now is make the other 3, which each one takes 5 minutes or less, or about 15 minutes in total. For the corn salsa, I removed the husk from 2 ears of corn and then gave them a spritz of oil and tossed them onto the griddle over medium heat. Let the exterior toast a bit and move them around, but meanwhile, I can chop the remaining components. For this, I really like using cilantro stems because they are generally wasted, and the stems provide a nice little crunch that works really well with this kind of salad salsa thing. Next, I diced a half of a shallot, and then once the corn was toasted, I brought that back over and sliced down the ear to extract the kernels. Then, add the corn, shallots, and cilantro stems to the container, and very importantly, add salt and a bunch of lime juice. I use the juice from 1/2 of a lime and a nice sprinkle of salt, and then just give everything a shake. And this gets so much better if you do let it sit about 30 minutes to an hour. Next up, we have the beans, which is one of my favorite quick sides. Add 5 grams of oil to a pan and toss in some sliced serrano peppers and 1 clove of sliced garlic. Let those saute down for about a minute, and then pour in the entire container of black beans and let that all come to a simmer. Lastly, add a big sprinkle of salt, and I like to season it with a big sprinkle of smoked paprika, which will really come through a bit more in that burrito bowl. Let this simmer for 2 minutes and then transfer it to container. And lastly, we need to make the cilantro lime avocado crema. This is such a good alternative for a bunch of guac and sour cream. To a food processor or blender, add 150 grams of low-fat sour cream or low-fat yogurt, 110 grams of ripe avocado, a handful of cilantro, a big sprinkle of adobo seasoning, and some lime juice before pulsing all of that together. And now it is time to assemble and see how the cost, calories, and taste stacks up compared to Chipotle. To assemble, first I added the beans, then tossed on some of the crema. Next, 50 grams of shredded lettuce to help bulk the volume up a bit, and then a hefty serving of the corn before coming in with our seasoned beef. 14 grams of pepper jack cheese go over that, along with more crema over the top. And let's take a look at the stats. So the cost per bowl is just a little over $8, as I easily have enough meat and the sides to make 4 burrito bowls. I'll pop the macros up on screen, and this bowl comes in at 850 calories or 325 fewer, which is pretty solid for a same size bowl. It has more beef than the double Chipotle as well, but lastly, how does it stack up in terms of taste?
Basically, I've starved myself the entire day waiting for this moment, and I could not be more excited. All right, let's start with Chipotle, then we'll get into mine, and then we'll talk through some of these components because like I've really elevated all the elements in mine, but I haven't kind of tasted them all together, mixed up as you should do with a burrito bowl. So let's get in. I mean, it's your classic, trusty, reliable Chipotle, but let's mix this up. I'm so excited for this. I've been snacking on the components, but I have a feeling once I kind of mix everything together, this is just gonna go so well together. This is just like fantastic. So much depth of flavor going on. And I think really the core 3 things for me are, number 1, getting some little charring and crispiness on the steak. Not only introduces a little bit more texture, but also flavor as well. Adding extra lime juice to that corn salad really helps kind of freshen and liven everything up. And then it's kind of not drowned in cheese and sour cream, which I feel like happens with Chipotle. It gets a little over with the dairy, and that also adds a lot of calories. So if you're kind of trying to cut back, that's a good area to do so. And then it's just super fresh, super nice, and kind of a hybrid between like not quite like a chopped salad, but because it has less rice, it's just like a nice eating experience, full of texture, a ton more depth of flavor, a little bit of smokiness from the beans and that smoked paprika. But I mean, sign me up for that 5 days a week. And you have a couple of those components in the freezer, as I showed you. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed. You can make this at home. It is, lower calorie, lower cost, isn't too much of a hassle to make if you kind of pre-prep some of those components. But hopefully you guys have enjoyed. That will wrap it up for me. Recipe for my burrito bowl will be up on our website, but I will catch you all in the next one. Peace, y'all.